Okay then. Well, welcome to the Poetry Box Live. I'm Shawn Aveningo Sanders, and I'll be your host for tonight's show. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, my husband Robert and I run a small boutique press here in Portland, Oregon, known as the Poetry Box. And the Poetry Box Live is our way of supporting our talented authors to help them connect to a broader audience. And with that said, we are very excited to present three fabulous poets for you here today. We have Dianalee Velie reading from New Hampshire. We have Julia Paul joining us from Connecticut, and we have Zeina Azzam reading from Virginia. So let's get started with our very first featured reader for today, Dianalee Velie, author of Italian Lesson. Dianalee Velie is the Poet Laureate of Newbury, New Hampshire, where she lives and writes. She is a graduate of Sarah Lawrence College and has a Master of Arts in Writing from Manhattanville College, where she has served as faculty advisor of Inkwell, a literary magazine. Her award-winning poetry and short stories have been published in hundreds of literary journals, and many of them have been translated into Italian. She is the author of 5 additional books of poetry and is a member of the National League of American Pen Women, the New England Poetry Club, the International Women's Writers Guild, the New Hampshire Poetry Society, and founder of the John Hay Poetry Society. So please welcome Dianalee Velie.
Thank you, Shawn. Thank you. You've done a beautiful book on Italian Lesson. I just love the way it looks. Thank you so much for all your hard work. Well, the first poem I'm going to read is the title poem in the book, Italian Lesson. My Italian needs lots of help. The spongy coral-like object on my plate does not appear edible or anything like I would imagine the seasonal fish stew I thought I had ordered would look like. Poking at the glob with my fork, it wiggles as my knife struggles with the first cut. Proceeding with serious caution, the smallest possible piece makes its way to my suspecting palate. I have chewed softer gum. My mind starts screaming, don't swallow, and perspiration stains my silk blouse until with childlike deception, I lift my napkin to my lips, pat them delicately, and spit out the masticated mess. Inhaling a gulp of my wine, then air, I smile at the Sicilian waiter and then my date and ask in perfect Italian, "Che cosa è busseca?" He answers in perfect English, "One must develop a taste for Italy, signora, especially a taste for the tripe." Il dolce farà niente, which means the art of the sweetness of doing nothing. Dozing, we wander in a wonder of semi-slumber, filling the hours of il riposo, the rest, with the sweetness of doing nothing. Vacationing in Positano, the Tyrrhenian sea breezes waft over us with silken waves of wind. We bare our bodies and satiate our souls. Welcoming mindfulness instead of full minds, luscious linens amidst green foliage scent the air with citrus musings. Billowing white table linens drying in the sun on our villa's veranda mimic the pregnant sails on boats bound for Capri. Mesmerizing aquamarine waters sprinkled with solar diamond dust lull us with the sound of surf as we sip sparkling Prosecco, lost in each bubble. Listening to the silence of whipped cream clouds and the tickling sound of angels' laughter, we savor this lusciousness called life. Next, I'll read Art. Art is a Tetzerima sonnet. Dante wrote the whole Purgatorio, Inferno, and Paradiso in Tetzerima. Tetzerima sonnet, Art. We have explored Florence's Uffizi, witnessed personally prominent works of priceless art, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Botticelli, and the rest. But here in the Alps, beside a simple goat cart, in front of the rustic red house on his farm, Stefano stands tall, spare, and stark. A basket of onions is poised on his arm, while sunlight glistens his olive skin. Perspiration a part of his natural charm. He tosses us a heartbreaking grin set in aquiline features that make us faint, while we think of how many ways we can sin. This feast some female artist should paint. Alas, some woman with great moral restraint. Blessing of the birds. We stayed in a monastery and it was converted into rooms and birds would flock. I mean, they would just flock to the belfry all the time. Blessing of the birds. The flock of common red-polled finches, their tiny heads capped in scarlet, like the cardinals descending upon Rome, landed on our patio under the pewter dome of a pious Roman sky. A beautiful benediction, joyously dining on communion of sunflower seeds and sipping from the chalice of sun-warmed bird bath. They paused only to sing a chorus of qui, a Kyrie eleison to nature's glory, a perfect psalm of their ritual migration. Wrapped in my white bathrobe like the newly ordained Pope, officiating at his first Sunday Mass, I blessed my flock with a simple prayer of gratitude, then watched them scatter, sweeping and arching, dipping and twirling, returning to the heavens. Ode to the ravioli I left behind. I don't know if anybody's like me, but I have food boxed up all the time because portions are so huge. And inevitably, 50% of the time, I leave the box on the table. So this is Ode to the ravioli I left behind. True to my fickle brain, I left you behind in the styrofoam to-go box, destined you to the restaurant's trash bin instead of providing me with 2 scrumptious lunches. You were perfection, aglow in olive oil, your little patty cakes of dough infused with emerald spinach and filled with fluffy ricotta. Sauteed peppers, broccoli, and mushrooms crowned your glory. Oh, to leave such perfection behind. Forgive me, please, and add this error to the temple of my transgressions. Unless, of course, I pray, our Italian waitress took you home to relish after her long shift, sitting in bed with her American boyfriend, seductively feeding each other tiny morsels of his stolen indulgence. This would grant me forgiveness and atonement. This would clean my plate. Petrarchan Pride. This is a Petrarchan sonnet, a little bit different than a Shakespearean sonnet. It has a different rhyme scheme. And we stayed, one of the times I went there, we stayed on a farm and I got to ride a stallion, which I thought I could handle. I had my own horse for 28 years, so I was really confident I could do this. Petrarchan Pride. Riding the white stallion named Petrarch delights me as much as writing a sonnet in Petrarchan style. He does not know this poet brushing him, but his eyes show the spark of a reigning dictator, a monarch in his red barn in this Cortona hamlet. His coat, now as smooth as snowy velvet, I prepare to saddle up and embark on this brave Italian venture, knowing I am in for a wild ride. Confident and completely sure I can handle his untamed galloping stride, I urge him on through the pasture where he bucks me off with Petrarchan pride. Ruined my pride about being able to ride. Mount Etna is a villanelle. We have cousins in Sicily that we go visit often. And once when we were there, we were eating in Taormina on a rooftop restaurant, and Etna was just spilling bright red lava flows down the mountain, and it was surreal to watch. And a villanelle repeats lines, so you'll hear a lot of repetition. On a rooftop patio in Taormina, we sip Prosecco in the warm evening air, enjoying everything about Sicilia, especially the view of fiery Etna, streams of molten lava, a dramatic flare on a rooftop patio in Taormina. This dramatic volcanic montagna dominates the view as we all stare, enjoying everything about Sicilia. Our lemon-scented evening, Che Bella, seems ageless, magical, and so rare. On a rooftop patio in Taormina, Mount Etna casts her ancient aura, awing tourists in each cozy chair, enjoying everything about Sicilia. A volcano displays fiery fanfare to foreign travelers so debonair on a rooftop patio in Taormina, enjoying everything about Sicilia. La nebbia means fog, the fog. I was teaching in an old farmhouse, and the windows don't have screens. They just have shutters that close, and they were all open, and the fog rolled in, and it made the whole room look like it was in a mystical dream. And I wrote this while I was sitting there in the fog. La nebbia. La nebbia floats in waves, miniature clouds drifting through the old white shutters of our 400-year-old Crotona farmhouse and settling indoors around us like zabaione, the rich creamy dessert we feasted on last night. Enveloping our bodies with moist Tuscan air, opaque as the porcelain skin of La Madonna, this fog glides around us, is inhaled and exhaled, until even the ochre stuccoed walls soften, breathe, acquiesce to this breath of the gods. The silver mist trembles, quakes, infantile droplets of moisture mixing with antiquity, restoring, rejuvenating, resting on windowsills, oak cupboards, and rustic pine beams. The dried shafts of wheat, parched and stalwart, relax into the heart of a vase as blue as the Adriatic Sea, dreaming of becoming warm toasted bread. Cushioned by this ghostly shroud, the church bells soften, chime the Angelus as the spirits of Roman soldiers march on the old Etruscan road, their spear tips glittering in the fog, disguised now as the undersides of olive leaves, twinkling silver ornaments taunting La Nebbia with sporadic brilliance. We lean on old stone sills, beckoning this mist indoors, mesmerized and lost, having allowed this fog to swirl and curl us into past civilizations where dreams of this projected day propelled us into the clouds, this day destined for infinity, this pewter domed day aglow in Italy. The fog casts a magical spell. Santa Laura slays the dragon is the next poem. In Sicily, when my son got engaged, we flew over again to introduce the cousins to his new wife-to-be. And it was like a scene out of The Godfather. Santa Laura slays the dragon. Like a scene from The Godfather in Sicily, we stroll the streets of Ibla, Old Ragusa, leading La Passeggiata. My son, Joe, and his fiancée, Catherine, are followed by Mia Cugina, Laura, and me, Laura's husband, Gianfilippo, and Chiara, their daughter, then a family friend and their son, Livio, all the duos linked arm in arm, a small parade of La Familia. The temperature stays warm as we leisurely regroup to enter La Chiesa de San Giorgio Vecchio. My daughter-in-law, still comfortable in a camisole top displaying her lovely arms, is stopped by a portly matron dressed in all black, sitting under the famous portal. No, no, she waves her finger at us while breathing fire in Italian. We get the gist of her monologue. No exposed arms. Blessed cousin Laura promptly puts her arms around Catherine's shoulders, telling the dragon lady, now she is covered. We all file into the church built behind the ancient portal, the only structure left standing in Ibla after the earthquake of 1693. The matron is so scalding, we fear it might collapse now, but Laura has slain the dragon lady with one look and her spontaneous caress. Above her on the ancient portal, San Giorgio, sword in hand, is depicted doing the same. She was terrifying. Positano Pontoon. A pontoon also repeats lines. So you'll hear a lot of repetition. And this poem somehow found its way all over Italy. I keep getting prints of it. Positano Pontoon. A full moon over Positano lights the sea. Everywhere the sea glistens, illuminating lush lemons, sparkling like remote stars right here in the garden. The sea, everywhere the sea glistens, revealing fragrant bougainvillea like remote stars right here in the garden. Mesmerized by the sea's royal reflections, revealing fragrant red bougainvillea, lovers stop and stare at these enchantments. Mesmerized by the sea's royal reflections, sweet figs ripening in abundance, lovers stop and stare at these enchantments. Pink trumpet flowers cascading down cliffs, sweet figs ripening in rich abundance, everything mirrored, doubling this dreamscape, illuminating lush lemons, sparkling, everything mirrored, doubling this dreamscape, a full moon over Positano lights. So many parts of Italy are so very, very different. When we were leaving, when we stayed in the monastery, we had there were photographers teaching as well. I was teaching poetry and they were teaching photography. And we could never, ever lock the door, even with all the expensive equipment in it. We eventually got very comfortable with leaving it open, but in the beginning, all of us coming from the States were terrified of not locking the door. But then on the day we left, it locked. Arrivederci. We closed the huge door made of weathered olive wood slats, a door we were somehow never able to lock, the 5 deadbolts forever refusing to align, the door we left open like our hearts, arbored by a grapevine still displaying clusters of amethyst jewels, a door harboring expensive camera equipment and computers, containing lifetimes of stories, this door behind which an ethereal world existed, where photographers turned water into wine with infrared cameras, capturing our world in a magical, mystical mist, where we wandered, stranieri, strangers, searching ghostly images that materialized into stories and poems, told with waving hands and glittering starry eyes. This door, having beseeched us to come in, rest and create, now blushes in the amber sunset as we prepare for another journey and another door, when we hear the accidental click. The lock, more knowledgeable than fate, seals shut, like a camera lens closing, revealing, remembering, recording this week of our lives as we fold ourselves back into the Tuscan hills. Thank you. Arrivederci.
So thank you so much for sharing your vision of Italy. And for those of you who might not have Dianalee's book yet, one of the special things in this book is that we actually did it in color. And throughout the whole book are beautiful photographs that her husband, Robert Pop, took while they were there. So as you're reading the poems, you get to see some of the sights as well, which is really, really fun. And I have to say, I'm so glad you read the horse poem, because I just love the fact that you're in Italy and you meet an actual horse, ride an actual horse named Petrarch, and let's see, I have to write a sonnet. So that was just so perfect.
You know what the funny
so kismet, you know, I loved it. So thanks for sharing that.
I was writing and they made my husband muck the stalls.
That was just wonderful. So thank you so much,
Like
Dianalee. It was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Our next featured poet is Julia Paul, author of Staring Down the Tracks. Julia Paul's work has appeared or is forthcoming in literary journals, both national and international, including Comstock Review, New Mexico Review, Minerva Rising, Mag Review, and Radar Poetry, as well as several anthologies, including From Under the Bridges of America and Forgotten Women. 2 of Julia poems were nominated in 2020 for a Pushcart Prize. I think we nominated one of those poems for you from your book. And she's the president of Riverwood Poetry Series, a long-standing reading series in Hartford and an elder law attorney in Manchester, Connecticut. So please welcome Julia Paul.
Well, thank you to Shawn and Robert for putting on this event tonight and for inviting me to read. And thank you to the other poets on the panel. I'm honored to read with you. And thank you to everyone who's taking some time out of their Saturday night to listen to a little bit of poetry. The poems in my chapbook, which is called Staring Down the Tracks, deal with addiction. My oldest son suffered from substance use disorder for many years. My hope is that these poems help shine a light on this disease, an epidemic that kills hundreds of mostly young people every day in this country. And it's not often spoken about. These poems are meant to bring you in behind the closed doors of those who struggle in order to bring some awareness and conversation and to break the silence and stigma that surrounds drug addiction. So I'm going to start by reading a poem called One Summer Day. Before the needle twanged in his arm, before the bent spoon bent back the strap, before complaining veins, before a procession of scabs jeweled his flesh, before his half-lidded chase for what couldn't be caught, before sepsis, before hep C, before the trampled path into the woods behind Save-A-Lot, before unforgiving rain, endless snow, blistering heat, before donated blankets and gloves, shoplifted sunblock, before the cardboard sign held up to passing cars, before waiting for someone to toss their cigarette as they entered a store so he could snatch it, bring it to his lips, and dry hump it back to life, before long sleeves in summer and pawn tickets stashed under football trophies, before the oxy parties, before the root canal, the script, the refills, before ashes, ashes, we all fall down. There was a boy who loved his skateboard, how it took him where he wanted to go, to all that might have been. This next poem, I have to thank the Poetry Box for nominating it for a Pushcart Prize. It's called Black Dot. This is what loneliness looks like, defined by what surrounds it. A single black balloon slipping through white sky. This is the period sitting stone still at the end of a sentence, any sentence, including this one. This is what God looks like from behind closed eyes, faceless and distant. This is the soul, according to some, the soul blackened by sin, the light of grace snuffed out. No, this is the needle mark. This is the black hole into which the self disappears. This is the exit wound. The next poem is called Broken Flesh. Among the wandering and lingering on this street of boarded up bodegas and discarded nips, a young man descends broad near Madison. Closer now, his face broadcasts the distinct scabs of an addict. He gestures with a hand pocked with track marks, some fresh, still glistening, almost pretty, like dew caught by sunlight. Somewhere else, his mother clutches a coffee cup as morning stabs through her window blinds. Notice the remnants of a manicure, still glossy, but chipping, chipping. Notice also her palms, how their lines arc and tangle like tree branches felled by a storm. And her face, trace its map to the heart that beats like a fist against a locked door. course, having a child who struggles with addiction means countless sleepless nights of waking and worrying, which is addressed in the next two poems. This one is called Wake and Watch. Wake is parting waters, is aftermath, is tomorrow. Sun is chewed fingernail, ragged under torn sky, is tinder and cinder. The heat of the day is not begun, is building muscle. The heart is muscle, auto-rhythmic in its blossoming grief. Pine is tower of boughs, is state of the heart, is box. The watch is only begun. The watch is tickless, weightless. The heart is watcher at the well, coins tossed into bottomless waters, wake left by wishes. The heart begs for change. Just coffee and dessert. She's advised to have spinach pie and Greek salad at Frankie's Diner, down the hill from the detox center, while she waits to see if insurance will cover his second admission in 2 weeks. She orders carrot cake instead, because it has raisins in every bite, like little jewels strewn on the floor of a dense forest where there's no trail, just shadows and tree branches reaching out, blocking or showing the way. It's hard to tell which. So you stumble along, and when you fall to your knees, caught in a thicket because you forgot to bring a machete into this forest, you might find there something as useless as a ruby or emerald, which you'll put in your pocket because it's evidence of magic. And cannot the same be said of a raisin, sweet on the tongue of a woman alone at table 6 in the harsh light of Frankie's Diner, half a mile down the road from the detox center. My son had multiple stints of sobriety over the years, once actually for 5 years, during which he was a substance use counselor, a job he was awesome at. This poem is for anyone in the early, fragile days of recovery. It's called Recovery Prayer. The curtains parted just enough so daylight sneaks through. The sun doesn't need to flood the room, not yet. Like the starving man at the bottomless buffet, take it slow. Otherwise is your thin shadow. Check the rearview mirror for the 18-wheeler that travels the rain-slicked road. Take it slow. Look up except when walking the cusp of the canyon. Move forward unless the ice beneath you begins to crack, or the tide grabs your knees, or the flames reach out for your hand, or the grenade comes rolling towards you. Hold onto hope like it's the rope swaying above raging waters, a hand in the dark, the ladder outside the burning room, the rail above the abyss. Hold on to the homily, the stars in the matte black night, the photograph in the wallet, to the poem or song or blossoming rose. Hold on to that splinter of light, the voice you used to know. This next poem is called Cycles. Blue moon. Twice this month to detox. Twice he walks away. Twice a second chance. Supermoon. Obsession, compulsion, obsession, compulsion, obsession, compulsion. Harvest moon, fast-tracked bus to Hartford. The cravings consume him. The feast at the altar waits. Blood moon, the needle can no longer find a proper vein. A bloody mess when he shoots up. Wolf moon, he paces like an animal, tears at scabs on his hands, turns off the light he can no longer bear. Tragically, my son, Brendan James Paul, died from a fentanyl overdose in 2020. My final two poems that I'll share with you tonight were written after his death. The first is called Poem for My Son, and this is published in the most recent edition of Mom Egg Review, which is online. Poem for My Son. This is the poem in which you don't die. This is our hour to be together. The doorbell doesn't ring, not yet. Yesterday, I rearranged furniture. A table in front of the south-facing window. In place of the peace lilies, begonias and geraniums, their stems reaching toward the light. In this poem, we've just made tacos or spaghetti. You're laughing at your own jokes, telling your brothers about times you snuck out of the house, how you always got away with things. In this poem, I say, I love you, be safe. There are so many details to see to. To bring you back is to give you shape and smell, cell by cell. There's birdsong outside the window. The bush by the door, the one I never learned the name of, is budding. The earth is coming to spring. In this poem, the whole world wants to wear your face. And my final poem is actually the first poem I wrote after he died, when I tried to envision what moving forward would look like. It's called On Buying a Paddleboard After the Death of My Son. The salesman who said February is the best time to buy a paddleboard had a nice smile and was around my son's age. I wanted to hug him for his mother, who was probably not at that moment thinking how lovely he is. I had paddleboarded once on Cochiti Lake. It was like floating on sunlight. There were no sharp edges. The lake was boundless. The lake was gentle. It was the life I longed for. It was the life I longed for my son. I want to focus on the distance while slipping past it. I want my balance back. I want to lift my eyes to the sky without going under. I want to float while on bended knees. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. If only the wind would take me away. When I unclench my fist, the wind will take him away. When I fall, the water will release me over and over. I want to be brave enough to float again. With something solid beneath me, I will throw his name into the air. I will move through the water toward an absence that is everywhere. Nevertheless, I will move through the water. Thank you so much.
Julia, that was really special, really beautiful, and I wish I was there to just give you a big hug, mom to mom. I can't thank you enough.
I'll take it virtually.
I can't thank you enough for writing this collection, for sharing your pain, shining a light on this huge, huge epidemic we have And, you know, I think the poem, the one you started with, actually is one that always really grabbed me quite a bit. And when you get to that part where it's, there was a boy who loved his skateboard, how it took him where he wanted to go and all the places that might have been.
Thank you.
Our final feature tonight is Zeina Azzam. Zeina Azzam is the author of BAYNA In Between. She is a Palestinian-American poet, writer, editor, and community activist. She volunteers for organizations that promote Palestinian human rights and the civil rights of vulnerable communities in Alexandria, Virginia, where she lives. Zeina currently works as a publications editor for the think tank Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Her poems have appeared widely in journals and anthologies, including Pleiades Magazine, Cordite Poetry Review, Beltway Poetry Quarterly, Mizna, Split This Rock, The Poeming Pigeon, Gaza Unsilenced, Yellow as Turmeric, Fragrant as Clothes. With the poet Sharif Al-Musa, Zeina co-translated 14 poems by Arab poets for Luck Raven Review. She holds an MA in Arabic Literature from Georgetown University and an MA in Sociology from George Mason University. It is my pleasure to welcome Zeina Azzam.
Thank you so much, Shawn. And it's really hard going after your poetry, Julia, which was really so powerful and so moving and very touching. And my condolences to you and your family. And Dianalee, it's lovely to be reading with you. First, I'd just like to thank Shawn for everything she did in terms of this book. I really appreciated her design and her willingness to put some Arabic on the cover. I'm not sure that's ever been done before. I don't know, at Poetry Box. And so I really appreciated that. It's been lovely working with you. And so I would like to just say quickly that, as Shawn mentioned, I'm Palestinian, and my parents were refugees in 1948 when there was a war and the state of Israel was established. And so they became refugees and went from Palestine to Syria to Lebanon, and then we came here to the United States. So I had my childhood in Beirut and was an immigrant with my family at age 10. My first poem is titled Leaving My Childhood Home. On our last day in Beirut, with my 10 years packed in a suitcase, my best friend asked for a keepsake. I found a little tin box to give her, emptied of lemon drops, that would hold memories of our childhood, us swinging in the dusty schoolyard, rooftop hide and seek, wispy sweet jasmine, kilos of summertime figs, king of falafel tahini-based sandwiches, our pastel autograph books. All those remembrances crammed in that box, tiny storytellers waiting to speak. Later, her family would uproot too, transplant like surly Palestinian weeds pulled every few years. We all knew about this, even the kids. I never saw her again, but know that she also learned to travel lightly, hauling empty boxes, pulsing with kilos of memories. I think because of, the refugee stories, the narratives that I lived and breathed through my parents all my life, I have a special, sensitivity and empathy to other refugee communities, and especially the Syrian refugees, the raging war that's been in Syria for so many years. I've got 3 poems in the chapbook about Syria. I'm going to read a very short one. I volunteered a few years ago at a dental clinic here in Northern Virginia that was giving services to Syrian refugees, and I was helping translate from English to Arabic. Syrian refugee at the dental clinic, Iman from Homs is 20 years old. At 13, she married and got pregnant with the first of 4 children. A broken tooth and 3 cavities, baby on her breast, mouth wincing in pain. Iman never learned to use a toothbrush to clean accumulated tar, plaque, or microscopic bits of food left over from her journey a month ago. Maybe that's why she clenches her teeth, to keep the taste of home. So the title of the book, as Shawn mentioned, is BAYNA, BAYNA, in between. BAYNA is the Arabic word for between. So when you put 2 of them together, BAYNA, BAYNA, or sometimes it's just BAYNA, BAYN, it means betwixt and between. And I chose that to be the theme of my chapbook because I feel like I'm in between things a lot in my life. Everything from being, from home to exile to being between 2 languages, between 2 cultures, and also just, having love and losing love, having loving family members and losing them or friends. So there's always this sort of in-betweenness. So the title of the poem is BAYNA, BAYNA, in between, and it starts with an epigraph from an old novel called Arabian Jazz by Diana Abu Jabir. And I held on to this quote for many years until I used it with this poem. And here's the quote. To be the first generation in this country with another culture always looming over you, you are the ones who are born homeless, Bedouins. You're torn in 2. You get 2 looks at the world. You may never have a perfect fit, but you see far more than most ever do. BAYNA, BAYNA, in between. Through a darkened window, I look for the moon of my childhood. It was bigger then, closer, with rays spread like illumined hands against a deep blackness between night and morning. After we crossed the sea, then the ocean, leaving home behind, I began to see everything like this moon's light, BAYNA, BAYNA, in between, bookended by other elements, defined by borders not its own. I was a green shoot, sprouting from 2 leaves, a river meandering between banks that spell its shape, give it a name. My dreams were flower petals pressed in pages of a book about aliens and travelers. I lived in the canyon between a mother language and an adopted tongue, BAYNA, BAYNA, betwixt and between. I looked for others who collect stories about childhood moons, oceans crossed with faith that we will press against each other on the other side, make something new, 2 eyes wide open, 2 looks at the world, lifting up our in-betweenness, not knowing if one day we would see far more than most ever do. This poem is about my mother who passed away about 1.5 years ago. And I thought a lot about her as a refugee who is growing older. And I wondered, I watched her and how she dealt with her memories and her pain and how it sort of aged with her. Far side of the moon. The epigraph is, her face is as beautiful as the moon. It's an old Arab saying. She is my mother, though the nugget of who she used to be is now turned away from us like the far side of the moon, reflecting light somewhere else. My mother pauses at now elusive words, forgets how to do simple things like changing the TV channel, making coffee, reading more than a few lines of a library book. We talk every day about the same things and reminisce too, because she loves to remember her life before the moon shifted. My mother is slowly letting go of her things, the pans and spatulas left behind like disinvited guests, the dough hook and the wire whip, laborers for decades, reluctantly given away. Stained glass butterflies hovering on her living room window have alighted elsewhere. Left in cabinets now are pieces she can't forsake. Tapestries and bowls from Palestine that remind her of scarlet poppies, a cobalt blue sea, an oversized tin box stuffed with black and white photographs from before the war, a century for her memories. She has not let go of that war, but the war doesn't linger much anymore on her lips because my mother now ends conversations before it's time, gives up on finishing a sentence. Yet her cratered face, still beautiful, is illumined by visits of a grandchild, telephone calls, a son's embrace. We bring chocolates, elicit a smile that lingers a while. My mother reminds us to look for the moon, even if turned, even if dark. Today, May 8th, is actually my father's birthday. He also passed away quite some time ago. This is a poem about him. My father's hands. They were not large, but thick, fleshy workers in the garden, nursing eggplants and fennel, okra and chard, digging and tilling and weeding, making the soil an obliging host. Maybe that's what made his fingers rough in spots, or maybe it was the constant leafing through books, a loving lick and a flip-flap of the page in search of nuggets that would be turned over and over in his mind. After he died, I found bookmarks between pages, carefully pointing like tags next to seedlings in the earth. These are the plants I hoped for. These are the ideas that made me grow. I'd like to read a poem about another friend, a friend I lost very early on. He was 19 and he died in a tragic bicycle accident in high school. Bob Hennessy, 1955 to 1974. You rode through our high school years on a 10 speed, not fast, but deliberate, bold, arms wide, two erect branches seeking sunlight, palms outstretched to greet air. To you, everything had a pithy core to explore. Scattered seeds needed to be gathered, beheld, unpeeled, understood. As our classmates went to college, you hitchhiked west, baled hay, befriended folks none of us would ever meet. You towered at 6'4", a robust trunk, flaming red curls standing up to the world, soldiers at attention. Maybe that's why I think of you most in autumn, when the Japanese maple turns myriad shades of flame. I imagine your roots lie here. Leaves fall as if in deference. The year you died, winter came too soon. I'll end with a poem that has a little bit of a more lighthearted aspect to it. It's called Poem for an Empty House. You guessed that I went home to an empty house every day, your eyes two flags at half-mast. Was I right, you asked? Do you feel lonely? I wanted to explain that on my way, I stopped to smell honeysuckle hanging over the fence. Neighbors look out kitchen windows to wave. A hand of Fatima welcomes at my door. Later, there's a nightly meander to the river, Sometimes a moon rises in the east. Really, my life is fine, I want to say. But you knew that my biggest wish was to open the front door to smells of onion and garlic frying, a chef at greeting. He would wrap his apron around my back and draw me near, salt and pepper in hand, spices for desire. I'd let him gather me up like swelling dough, exhaling. Then we'd fall to the floor, 2 spoons in size order, clanging. Maybe my undressed eyes tell this story, or maybe you're vying for the role of chef, offering to chop onions and make me weep. Thank you.
Oh, I love the ending of that poem, Zeina. That's such a good one. Oh, thank you. I love this collection. I love the way you have weaved the stories of your homeland and then your family life and your journey. It's just beautiful. And we all have these in-betweens, like you said. And I think it's kind of fitting that right now, I think we're all experiencing the in-between of the pandemic and getting back to normal. We're kind of all in that limbo, kind of waiting for things to keep opening up and what's going to be there, you know? So we're all in between. You're not alone. So thank you so much for that. And thank you to all of our fantastic poets tonight. You guys were all just fabulous. And thank you for joining us for another edition of the Poetry Box Live. You know, as poets and authors have been impacted by the pandemic and the closures of all of our favorite reading venues, it's really been wonderful to have all of you join us each month from Zoom to celebrate their poetry. Next month, our show will be on Saturday, June 12th at 4 p.m. Pacific. And our featured poets will be Michelle Lerner, Sherry Rind, and Sue Fagalde-Lick. And to keep up to date on upcoming shows, new releases, submission opportunities, new books, please subscribe to our newsletter by going to thepoetrybox.com, where at the bottom of every webpage, you'll find a little sign-up form that you can fill out to get our newsletter. And before I forget, I want to wish all the moms out there and my mom back in St. Louis a very happy Mother's Day tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. You guys can all unmute yourself and chat with the poets, ask any questions. Have a great rest of the weekend. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
It was
much.
wonderful.
What an evening.
You are all terrific.